Greetings, I'm Delisna Dewalco, and welcome back to another segment of our English news. The government of Tigray hails Europe's principal stand and some concrete actions taken to compel the Ethiopian and Eritrean government to deviate from the destructive path. The UN's migration agency has put Ethiopian chief on administrative leave, citing unauthorized interviews in which she complained of being sidelined by higher-ups she claimed were sympathetic to the Tigrayan forces. President Kenyatta discusses Ethiopia with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York. The government of Tigray said Abiy's threatened offensive reinvade to Tigray has officially begun. The government issued a statement in which it urged the international community to go beyond rhetorical condemnation and take meaningful actions by imposing punitive measures on the Ethiopian, Eritrean, and regional Amhara governments to compel them to desist from their genocidal project. Timnit Bairu has more.
Tigray External Affairs Office yesterday released a press statement on Abiy's final offensive on the people of Tigray. The statement said, despite repeated calls by the international community and the government of Tigray to find a peaceful resolution of the current crisis, the Ethiopian government has once again chosen to continue its genocidal war on Tigray. As repeatedly threatened and telegraphed to domestic and international audiences, Abiy's final offensive to reinvade Tigray, brutalize, and humiliate our people by reprising its genocidal acts has begun, the statement said. According to the statement, the Ethiopian military, with the support of Amhara forces, launched coordinated offensives on all fronts in the morning of October 11, 2021. In addition to fielding hundreds and thousands of regular and irregular fighters, these genocidal forces are supported by heavy artilleries, tanks, rockets, drones, and fighter jets, leaving no doubt about their annihilationist intent, the statement noted. The statement said, war was not and is not the first option for the government of Tigray, adding that Tigray has been repeatedly expressed its commitment to a negotiated ceasefire. But since the Ethiopian and regional Amhara genocidal forces are hell-bent on bringing as not and is not the first option for the people of Tigray to their knees, the people of the government of Tigray are forced into a war that they do not want but must win to ensure their survival, the statement stated. The statement disclosed that a secret recording of senior Ethiopian military officers established that Abiy Ahmed's government dishonestly attributes its defeat and subsequent departure from Tigray to the unaggressive implementation of its genocidal blueprint. As a result, their current drive is to pick up where they left off by annihilating the people of Tigray so that they would never be thorn into the side of Abiy Ahmed's government for the generations thereafter. It said the Tigray armed forces are currently defending against their adversaries' coordinated, multi-pronged offensive in order to spoil the genocidal plan and ensure the security of the people of Tigray. The statement recalled that after occupying Tigray for over 8 months, the Ethiopian and Eritrean militaries as well as allied Amhara forces suffered a series of decisive military defeats at the hand of the Tigray armed forces, though the western part of Tigray remains under military control with all the brutality that it entails. According to the statement, the Abiy Ahmed government has churned out a series of prepackaged statements presenting the retreat from Mekelle and much of Tigray as an act of mercy, a humanitarian gesture to facilitate farming and give the people of Tigray much-needed respite from the sound of gunfire. That manufactured narrative, designed to hide its humiliating defeat, was targeted at its gullible supporters who had been fed a constant diet of lies, to whom the truth would be a hard pill to swallow, the statement said. It said the truth is genocidal forces retreated from much of Tigray and left Mekelle in a disarray, not out of their non-existent humanitarian impulse, but because their voted divisions were destroyed, with several thousand killed, wounded, and captured. Having its back essentially broken by our forces, the Ethiopian military fled to rearm and regroup itself for another go at annihilating the people of Tigray, the statement noted. The statement said that Abiy Ahmed's government, after retreating from Tigray, has been on a shopping spree to acquire modern weapons from various countries. They have also been training new recruits mobilized following the national call to arms by the federal and regional Amhara governments. In short, once its hurried departure from Tigray, the Ethiopian government's back, essentially broken by our forces, has been busy rearming and regrouping for the express purpose of initiating a second round of invasions of Tigray. A number of senior civilian and military officials have publicly threatened to acquire Mekelle within weeks if the people in the government of Tigray did not comport themselves in a manner suggested by them. In reality, purpose of initiating a second round of invasions once they were ready has been their plan. The incessant self-congratulatory statements about the so-called unilateral ceasefire was a calculated move to hoodwink the international community into glossing over their well-documented atrocities against the people of Tigray, and, if possible, lull us into the sense of complacency, the statement said. It added the Ethiopian officials have also been exhorting their international interlocutors to be patient for that one final offensive that would be wrapped up in a matter of days or weeks, thereby rendering the issue of peaceful resolution moot. The statement said the priority of the people of the government of Tigray is to find a peaceful resolution to the crisis that established the status of ante, in which all invading forces must withdraw from all constitutionally established territories of Tigray. In practice, this entails the withdrawal of Amhara forces to their pre-war territories, the withdrawal of all Eritrean forces from Ethiopia, as well as the end of the inhumane siege on Tigray. The statement added, since the Ethiopian government is committed to a predatory path to bring the people of Tigray to their knees, the Tigray armed forces have no other option than to defend their people against this marauding forces. This campaign of self-defense will continue until these genocidal forces come to their senses and choose a peaceful path, it emphasized. The statement called on the international community to condemn the latest offensive and support the people of Tigray in their hour of need. Abiy Ahmed's fantasy about a decisive military solution to a political conflict is at the heart of Ethiopia's current predicament. The statement said, through their well-documented, abominable atrocities against the people of Tigray were not enough. The genocidal forces once again keen to unleash devastating atrocities on the people of Tigray. It urged the international community to go beyond rhetorical condemnation and take meaningful actions by imposing punitive measures on the Ethiopian, Eritrean, and regional Amhara governments to compel them to desist from their genocidal project.
In related development, Tigray Armed Forces Central Command, Getachew Reda, tweeted saying ground attack in Abiy Ahmed's final offensive is in its second day, and that thousands have already perished in what he called the latest round of reckless campaign. Our forces are holding their ground and more. The latest adventure can only help deepen Abiy's loss, period, Getachew Reda wrote on his Twitter. The government of Tigray hails Europe's principled stand and some concrete actions taken to compel the Ethiopian and Eritrean government to deviate from their destructive path. It, however, sadly noted the international response to genocidal war on Tigray has been woefully inadequate. The government of Tigray yesterday issued an official statement on the joint motion for the resolution by the European Parliament. The government of Tigray is grateful to the European Union for its consistent and principled efforts to find a peaceful resolution to the crisis in Tigray, and in particular in Ethiopia in general. The joint motion for a resolution passed by the European Parliament on the 6th of October 2021 is an extension of the European community's principled, humane, and morally informed position on the multifaceted humanitarian crisis engulfing Ethiopia resulting from the genocidal war in Tigray. We commend the European Parliament for cataloging a litany of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and acts of ethnic cleansing, and the genocide perpetrated by the Ethiopian and Eritrean militaries, as well as allied Amhara forces against the people of Tigray. We would also like to express our appreciation to the European Parliament for highlighting the plight of Tigrayans being subject to untold atrocities, including arbitrary arrests, suspensions, and revocation of business licenses, forced disappearances, and murder throughout the Ethiopians solely on the account of their identity. Consequently, the humanitarian landscape in Tigray remains dire and is expected to get worse. The multifaceted humanitarian crisis associated with violent conflict have been exacerbated in the case of Tigray by the willful, cruel, and immoral impositions of the de facto blockade. By the Abiy Ahmed government, medical supplies are denied entry into Tigray, and humanitarian partners are out of food stock. As a result of shortage of food and medical supplies, countless Tigrayans have been subject to otherwise preventable deaths. By expelling 7 high-level UN officials, on September 30th, the Ethiopian government has once displayed its disdain for the rules and the norms of governing international conflict. The decision to expel these officials came at a time of maximum need, once again confirmed the government's deliberate weaponization of starvation to achieve that which has eluded on the battlefield, bringing the people of Tigray to their knees. Aside from the inadequacy or the international response thus far, we also have observed a perplexing tendency to apportion blame for ongoing hostilities not on the basis of objective facts, but on the need to appear even-handed. The Abiy Ahmed government has exploited this tendency by manufacturing countervailing accusations against the Tigrayan forces as to muddy the narrative and escape accountability for the plethora of atrocities committed against the people of Tigray. Saying there are two more parties to conflict does not automatically imply that their causes are equally just and their conducts are equally appropriate. The European Parliament resolution suggesting the imposition of sanctions on all parties if conditions do not improve by the end of October is a glaring example of the tendency to propose punitive sanctions on victims and aggressors alike. However, the application of indiscriminate sanctions bound to fail to achieve its objectives, for by punishing the victims, it rewards the aggressors. The people of Tigray are already fighting an uphill battle, given the limited domestic and international resources at their disposal. Punishing them for defending themselves in the quest for even-handedness makes a mockery of justice. The government of Tigray has, among other things, accepted the principles outlined by Biden's executive order, affirming its commitment to a negotiated resolution of the current crisis. By contrast, Prime Minister Abiy, open letter to President Biden, demonstrated its predilection for a military solution to a fundamentally political conflict. In fact, the Prime Minister deliberately conflated calls not to starve its citizens to death, violate their rights, and seek a negotiated solution with encroachments on the national sovereignty and a common retained by authoritarian governments determined to commit atrocities against the Tigrayan citizens. And yet the aggressors, a reflexive effort and even-handedness means that the victims are also included in conversation about a coercive sanction, and if the goal of the threatened sanction is to compel and change course, they must be targeted at the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments, the parties highly against change. The government of Tigray once again reiterates its commitment to support and work with independent investigations of allegations made to address any wrongdoings on the part of our forces. The Abiy Ahmed government is determined to exterminate the people of Tigray through a slow asphyxiation, and is also the side that has been obstructing the delivery of humanitarian supplies and seeking to prolong the conflict by officially threatening another round of brutal offensive against Tigray. Indeed, our military engagements outside of Tigray are intelligible in context of our adversaries' public pronouncements to bring us to our knees, and our engagements are thus motivated by the desire to break the siege and fend off another round of invasions, one adversary have regrouped, re-earned, and making our military campaign fundamentally defensive. The government and the people of Tigray merely ask that they are allowed the right to survive as the people. In fact, the resolution by the European Parliament catalogs a litany of horrific crimes committed by the invading forces against the people of Tigray. But when it comes to coercive sanctions, even-handedness rears its ugly head. Only commitment to a misplaced notion of fairness could lead to the inclusion of people and the government of Tigray in conversation about punitive measures. The Ethiopian government and its propaganda outlets have been working over time to establish some kind of moral equivalence between their genocidal forces and the other Tigrayan forces engaged in the campaign of self-defense that is morally just as it is legally sound. It would be a miscarriage of justice if the international community bought into this narrative and punished the people of Tigray for exercising their legitimate right of self-defense. Despite the aforementioned misgivings, the government of Tigray emphasizes its full support and appreciation for international efforts at removing the brutal siege, facilitating unobstructed humanitarian aid, delivering and bringing about the negotiated ceasefire, ensuring the withdrawal of all invading forces from Tigray, and initiating independent investigation into all atrocities committed in the course of the brutal war on Tigray, and holding perpetrators accountable for their crimes. Advisor to the president of Tigray and member of Tigray Armed Forces Central Command, Getachew Reda, says Abiy Ahmed's military will now be able to set eyes on Mekelle even through a peace deal, let alone by force. He made the remark in an interview with the Dimtsi Wayana television on occasion of the station's 42nd anniversary. The army of Abiy's Prosperity Party is heard bragging that they will occupy Mekelle after a week, after 10 days, after a month, and putting other such deadlines, but it cannot see Mekelle from afar through a peace field, let alone take it by force. What business does it have in Mekelle? It is an army that should be held accountable for its crimes if it's spared from being destroyed, that is, said Getachew Reda in his tweet. The UN's Migration Agency has put its Ethiopian chief administrative leave, citing an unauthorized interview in which she complained of being sidelined by UN higher-ups she claimed were sympathetic to Tigrayan forces. The departure of Maureen Acheng, confirmed in letter dated Monday, as seen by AFP, risks further undermining an aid response to still shaken by Ethiopia's decision last month to expel 7 other senior UN officials for allegedly meddling in its affairs. Last week, multiple recordings surfaced online of Acheng and another senior UN official granting a lengthy interview to Jeff Pierce, a writer who has published multiple articles defending the government's conduct of the war against the Tigrayan forces. In the recordings, Acheng, the International Organization for Migration's chief of Ethiopia, tears into colleagues who descend on Addis Ababa after the war broke out last November, and her telling sideline officials on the ground. She also calls the TPLF dirty and vicious. At one point, she accuses the Tigrayan forces of plotting to have Tigrayan migrant workers facing deportation from Saudi Arabia and sent to Rwanda. And then you don't know what guerrilla movement starts from Rwanda. I mean, it's dirty, she says. She also vowed never to return to Tigray. In an internal note to colleagues last week, also seen by AFP, Acheng said she was deeply disturbed and disappointed by the audio when she had been surreptitiously recorded and selectively edited. However, at several points during the interview, and participants openly discussed that it is being recorded in fact. On Monday, Antonio Vitorino, Director General of IOM, wrote a letter distancing the agency from Acheng's comments. The opinions attributed in the audio recordings to the staff member do not correspond with IOM's principles and values and should not in any way be considered as expressing IOM's position, it said. The letter, which does not refer to Acheng by name, says she was immediately recalled and put on administrative leave pending an investigation. President Kenyatta discusses Ethiopia with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York. The president, who is in the U.S. on 2-day official visit, and the UN chief discussed several subjects of global importance, among them the security and humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region, as well as Haiti, preparation for the forthcoming UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. On Ethiopia, the president, his host, agreed to continue engaging the Ethiopian government and other actors in the internal conflict with a view of finding a lasting solution to this crisis. Today, the head of states have chaired UN Security Council session on diversity, state building, and peace before participating in International Peace Institute Global Leaders discussion in the UN Security General Common Agenda report. We'll have more on this news tomorrow. That wraps up our news for the day. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.